This is the Chappell Real Estate Show, episode number 24. Real estate truly saved my finances. And there's one other thing that I really want to qualify, and it's that no matter what, being in the kind of debt that I was in, trust me, was debilitating. There were days where I didn't even want to get up and get out of bed and go to work because I didn't feel like any of the money that I was working for was mine, regardless of if I was able to make a larger payment or if I could only make the minimum payment of $25 on a balance of $2,000. It didn't matter to me. I was going to make that minimum payment. And I think over the course of that 5.5 year period, up until a couple of months ago when we did pay off everything, I always made sure that I made those payments.
Welcome to the Chappell Real Estate Show, your source for the latest real estate information so you can buy, sell, and invest with the best in Texas. Whether you're a first-time buyer, a current homeowner, or a seasoned investor, you've come to the right place. We're here to simplify all things real estate so you can achieve your goals of property ownership with your hosts, Daniel and Roger Chappell.
What's up, listeners, and thank you guys for tuning into the Chappell Real Estate Show, your source for the latest real estate information so that you can learn how to buy, sell, and invest with the best. I'm your host, Daniel Chappell, and my dad and I have brought a little bit of a new episode for you guys. So we've talked about some of the topics that we're going to cover in today's show in previous episodes, but today basically is all about how real estate saved my personal finances. So really excited to share this information with you guys. I feel like my story is one that is very similar to a lot of other people out there. It's all too common, but I feel that a lot of people are ashamed of finding themselves in debt or not understanding the repercussions of some of the financial decisions that they make throughout their lives. So, this episode is all about normalizing that a little bit, kind of covering some of the things that, some of the financial mistakes that I made, as well as the couple of decisions that I made that helped propel me into the future. So with all that being said, thank you guys for joining us today. Let's switch it over to my dad. Hey, Dad, tell our listeners hello.
Hey, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well.
Oh, I'm sure everybody's doing great today. So, Dad, what is the Chappell Chunk for our listeners today?
So the Chappell Chunk today is very simply, don't be afraid to ask for help. I think we could all use a hand up from time to time. So when you find yourself in that financial debt and you're afraid that fear is one of the biggest driving factors that prevents people from taking action. So sometimes we have to overcome that fear, and part of the way to overcome that fear is to seek some help from somebody, and who knows what that help is going to look like. Only you as the individual are going to know what kind of help you need, so don't be afraid to ask for it. Ask for the help.
No, that's great advice, and I wish somebody would have told me that a long time ago because I feel like when it comes to finances, everybody feels like they're on their own. You find yourself in a position where you've gotten into some debt, and then I know in my case, I didn't even want to tell my mom and dad the how much debt I found myself in because I was ashamed of it. I didn't want to tell anybody. I just wanted to kind of keep the facade that, I had it all figured out. And I didn't. I wish I would have asked somebody for help years ago. Thankfully, I had made some positive financial decisions that now, 5.5 years later, have been able to benefit me. But it wasn't always like that. So I wish somebody would have told me that a long time ago. Don't be afraid to ask for help. That's absolutely great advice. So to kind of kick the day's episode off, I kind of wanted to give our listeners a little bit of background as to, my story is somewhat like a lot of others that I've heard, but it also definitely has its unique points. So I kind of want to preface this experience with my story so that you kind of understand how it kind of fits into your own personal situation. But basically, my story started a lot like a lot of other people's. At 18 years old, I graduated from high school. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do next. I went to community college because I had a bunch of friends of mine that were going to community college. And, I went out on my own. And my parents, initially, they didn't want me to have a job. So the first year of college, it was all about getting used to the college life, getting focused on, the academics and everything. So I didn't get a job my first year. And Honestly, I was never the best student. So I think I got bored my first year in college, and it was my second year when I stumbled into a Chipotle restaurant, and a friend of mine who I knew from high school was actually working there, and she sat me down with the manager, and I ended up having, unbeknownst to me, my first interview, and ended up accepting a job there when the manager offered me a job site on the spot right there. So um, whenever that happened, I remember kind of thinking and doing a little bit of self-analyzing, like, what is important to me? Am I really focused on school right now? And the answer to that question was no. So, at the time, I accepted a job part-time at Chipotle. I don't remember, Dad. How did y'all feel about that?
That's a good question. I know for me, having come from the school of hard knocks, I was in college as well for a very short period of time and realized very quickly that wasn't for me. So I wanted to enter the workforce, but I also knew I didn't have any skills or education to do that. So for me, the path was the military. So I kind of understood your position and where you were at the time. Much different than mom, and mom really did not want you to have to go through the hard knocks that she and I went through. I know from mom's perspective, and only she can tell you the true perspective on her idea, but I know for the two of us as parents, we just wanted you to do what you felt was the right decision for you. You were a grown adult, and I know for me personally, I felt like you needed to make your own decisions. And for us as parents to jump in there and make those decisions for you, I didn't feel like was appropriate, considering the fact that it seemed to me like you wanted to be out on your own and you wanted to make your own decisions. So I was very supportive of that. I also knew that there would be some consequences to pay for that, both positive and negative, and I kind of figured we had prepared you for that. So I was all supportive, 100% behind it. I don't know if mom really was in the beginning. I know she still wants you to get your degree, and I have two of them, so I definitely want you to get your degree, but at your pace. And so, I mean, I think we're all different in that regard. So, yeah, that's in a nutshell. That's where we're at there.
Yeah, well, I remember when I had first accepted the job, I still hadn't made the decision that I was going to leave school yet because I was just a base level employee, just got started on the line. And it was actually maybe a couple of months into working there that I realized how much I enjoyed. And I had had jobs in high school before that they didn't really excite me in any kind of a way. It was really just a way to punch in the clock, make a little bit of money so I could go have fun with my friends. But, when I got into this culture at Chipotle, I fell in love with the idea, the concept, and everything. And so I decided to pursue it as a career. And I knew very quickly after starting there that that's what I wanted to do. So it was about 6 months after I started working at Chipotle that I made the decision to withdraw from my classes. And I remember I actually withdrew in the middle of a semester. So that I know my mom and dad were not very pleased about. But I did. I made that decision. I felt like it was the right decision for me. And in doing that, my parents said, "Okay, well, you dropped out in the middle of the semester, and we paid for that semester. So if you're going out on your own, well, then you're on your own. We're not giving you any more money." And from that day forward, the day that I decided I was dropping out of school, I was on my own. And I started paying for my own rent and all those kinds of things. Well, after I had decided to make that decision, I started moving up through the ranks very quickly. I went from being a base hourly employee to a kitchen manager, service manager, and then a general manager in training, all within about a year or so. So I, like I said, when I put my mind to something, I'm very if I know what I want, I drive for it very quickly. And yeah, so I moved my way through the ranks very quickly in Chipotle. And, like most other people, as my income increased, so did all of my spending. That's where this story becomes a lot more common. So, I was very young. I started making a lot of money. And as most young people who make a lot of money do, they spend a lot of money. And, I remember I wanted to share my newfound success. I went and got my own apartment. I went into a nicer apartment. I went and bought a new car. I'd go out with my friends and I'd pay for a round of drinks every now and again because, you're young and that's what you do. That's what you think you do when you have money and you're young. Very quickly I found myself opportunity presented itself for me to relocate to the San Marcos, Austin area, which I now live in. And I decided to take that opportunity. I ended up getting another pay raise. And in relocating, I was offered a relocation package that offered to pay either my moving expenses or to offer closing cost assistance on a home. So unfortunately, the circumstances around my move, I had to move very quickly. I only had about 2 weeks to be from one city, moved into another city, and start my new job. So I didn't have time to find a home. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to take advantage of the closing cost assistance, but it did initiate a conversation with my parents about real estate and the importance of owning real estate. So then at that point, I made the decision, okay, I'm going to move to San Marcos. I'm going to rent for 6 months while I find a place to buy. And that's exactly what I did. I went and I found a lease for 6 months. I went and bought my first house 6 months after that. And that's where the story kind of really begins. Because at that point, I now had a mortgage. I had a couple of roommates come to move in with me to help cover the expense of the mortgage. But as all things go, I was making a lot more money. I had a new source of income, and I started putting things on credit cards. I wanted to fill up the new house. I bought a new TV. I bought new furniture. We got gutters for the house. We did the upgrades on the floors and, all these different things. And, before I knew it, I realized I had put $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 worth of stuff on credit cards and personal loans that, they weren't serving me in any way, and I didn't truly understand the interest behind them and the promotional periods and all those things that we talked about in our previous episode about finances. So, without that understanding, I found myself in a ton of consumer debt, and that's where I want to kind of talk about some of these things today. So I'm going to hand it over to my dad to ask a few questions to kind of guide the conversation a little bit, but that's kind of the backstory on how I got into that.
Yeah, so one of the first questions that comes to mind is for our listeners out there, especially young folks who may not have heard some of the terms that you use, can you define consumer debt?
So what I call consumer debt, or I guess you could also call it negative debt, because there are positive and negative kinds of debt. So what I call consumer debt is like credit cards, high interest credit cards, things like Best Buy. I had a Sam's credit card, just your regular Visa, MasterCard, consumer debt, just high interest consumer debt. That's what I consider to be consumer debt.
And then, in a good segue, you also mentioned that there's good debt. What is considered good debt?
So some of the good debts that I would consider would be like real estate, where you're taking out a lot of debt, but it's an appreciating asset that over time will more than likely actually yield you money as opposed to cost you money.
Okay. So you now have, you're in your own house. So I know when you first bought that house, you weren't eligible for the assistance that you were seeking when you did the relocation. So instead, I know your mom and I helped out on some of your closing costs. And correct me if I'm wrong, your first loan was an FHA loan. Is that not correct?
That is correct. So, and thank you for bringing that up. That's something that I definitely want to acknowledge, is that this isn't something that I was able to do on my own. I think a big part of my financial education came after I actually purchased the home, because I wasn't disciplined enough to understand how to really save money. So I actually didn't have to come up with a down payment. I used an FHA loan that required 3.5% down. I had the seller pay for, I think, $3,000 worth of my closing costs. The lender offered me a credit for using their lender. And I think I got another $2,000 or $3,000 off from the closing costs that way. And then in addition to that, I think you and Mom provided me around somewhere to the tune of, I think, $6,000 for the closing costs. So I think out of pocket, I only spent about $1,500 of my own money, and that wasn't even money that I had in my savings account. I think that was like my most recent paycheck that I then threw at the closing costs of this home. So it wasn't something that I was really necessarily prepared for, and I think that that's a big reason why the financial decisions I made afterward that kind of set me back a few years happened, truthfully.
So something happened. There was a catalyst. There had to have been something that jumped up at you that made you realize, holy cow, I've got a huge amount of debt and I got to get this figured out. What was that catalyst? What sparked that?
So it was very similar to Mom's experience. In the episode where we had Mom on, she was talking about how she had, this a promotional period. The promotional period expired. She hadn't paid off the promotional balance, and then she got hit with a bunch of debt, a bunch of interest. And that's what happened to me. The only thing is it happened to me on multiple cards at the same time. So when I had first bought my house, one of the first things I bought was a TV, right? I have a big house. I need a big TV to put in the house. So I bought a 55-inch screen TV. And at the time, this was like when 4K technology was brand new. So I think I paid over $1,000 for that TV. And then I went and got a PlayStation 4 to go along with it, all the accessories that went with it, controllers, video games, the headset, everything like that. Mind you, I'm not even good at video games. I don't why I bought all these things. It was simply because I wanted to have my friends, come over and we'd have something to do when they were over. So, I spent, I don't know, probably $2,500, maybe $3,000 on fun technology for the house. And I think I bought a sound bar for the TV too. And then I went and bought a new mattress, and I spent like $3,000 on mattresses and bedding and the new bed and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, and it all happened very quickly after moving into the house. So I think within maybe 4 or 5 months, I opened 5 or 6 different lines of credit and started just buying. I mean, even Sam's Club. I got carried away at Sam's Club. I got a Sam's Club card. They gave me a $2,000 balance, and I went and, I bought everything I thought I needed for the house, not realizing that, hey, you got to pay for all that stuff later. I think I probably spent maybe upwards of $10,000 on just things for the house in a period of 5 or 6 months, all of which were offered to me with, interest-free financing for 12, 18, 24 months. And in my mind, I'm like, oh, that's so much time. I have forever to pay this stuff off. Yeah, well, you also have a new mortgage payment that I hadn't even started paying yet because I moved in November. My first payment wasn't until January. And I had already spent more money after and it's like all these things. I hadn't even factored what the expenses of owning the home were, and I was already purchasing all these things. So, all of those promotional periods expired around the same time after 18 and 24 months. And then, I saw my balance go from, I owed $3,000 to all of a sudden I owed $3,900. And I'm like, wait a second, I just made a payment. I haven't bought anything new. What happened? And then the same thing happened on another account and another account and another account. And then I'm looking at all of my balances. And it was at that point when I went to go make the payments that month that those promotional balances expired, that's when I was like, oh my God, I need to map this out. Like how much debt am I in? And it was June in 2018. And I know so because I created a spreadsheet. And since June 2018, every single month since then, I have put my finances into this spreadsheet. So I could tell you in June 2018, I had $30,000 in consumer credit card debt, not including my home loan debt or my car loan debt.
Wow.
So yeah, it was at that point that I realized I need to get serious about my finances. So I made that spreadsheet. I saw how much debt I was actually in. And from that day forward, it was time to start digging my way out of the hole that I'd found myself in.
So you mentioned that was in 2018. And then, of course, you're under contract to buy a new house right now. So how long did it take you to buy down that debt, number one? And then number two, what was the strategy that you utilized to pay that debt down? Because there's a number of different strategies, but I want to hear what you did. What was your strategy to pay down your debt?
Yeah, absolutely. So right around the time that I decided to get serious about my finances, I had just started a job at AT&T and met a friend of mine whose name is Richard Sarmiento. And for my birthday that year, he gifted me 2 books. One was Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and the other one was a book on leadership. So I read the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book and got turned on to Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad radio show. And on that show, they mentioned something. I don't know if they had Dave Ramsey on as a guest, or I remember hearing a conversation about some of the different strategies to pay off debt. And the one that I tried first, which didn't really work for me, was paying off the balance with the highest percent interest. So I had created this spreadsheet that had all of my bills on it. It had all of my negative debt on it. And next to all of my negative debt, I had the percent rate that I was being charged in interest. So I looked at, there were credit cards are usually between 20 and 28%. So they were, those. And then there were some other cards that were in the lower 15%. And then, the car loans and things like that are around 4 to 5%. So I started looking at, okay, what the biggest balance that I had was actually on the highest interest rate that I had. So I started trying to pay that off. So any extra money that I had, I was putting towards that card. But I wasn't seeing any progress because it was the highest balance and the highest rate. It meant I was being charged the highest amount of interest. So I would pay $200 or $300 at that balance, but then I'd get charged $180 in interest. So then really I was only paying down the balance maybe $100, $120 a month. So it was chipping away, but very, 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 very slowly. And for me, I'm one of the, like, I need to see progress. That's how I stay motivated. I need to see the progress. And I just didn't feel like I was seeing any of the progress. It would take me a year to get the balance to drop $1,000 for me to even see the first number drop from 6,000 to 5,000. So that was it was tough for me, and I didn't feel like it was being effective. But I tried to do that for about a year, and I didn't notice hardly any difference in my finances. So then I started thinking, okay, how can I try to do this a little bit differently? So then I started looking at, okay, I think at the time I had maybe 2 accounts that still were on promotional financing. So I hadn't been charged interest on them yet. So the way that I was looking at that is, okay, last time I let my promotional balance or periods expire, I got hit with all of this interest. So I'm going to try to avoid all that interest because I'm not being charged it today, but if I don't get this paid off in time, I will be. So that kind of realization made me realize, okay, let me go ahead and start paying off these other balances. So they were lower balances, maybe $2,000, and there was no interest. So if I paid $200 on it, the balance was decreasing by $200. So that's where I started to see things start to change a little bit. So then I paid off one account, and then I had, my minimum payment on that account was $150. So I had $150 extra dollars to contribute to another account. So that's what I started doing is I started looking at my smallest balances because they would be paid off the fastest, and I started focusing on paying those off. And then I had a sales job that offered me bonuses, so when I'd get a bonus, I didn't look at that as my money. I looked at it as my regular income as my money, and then my bonuses were for paying off other debt. So when those bonuses came in, I would pay $1,000 or $2,000 on a credit card. And it, after I think about 2 or 3 years, I had taken that $30,000 and chipped it down to about $15,000. So that was a huge progression for me, to go from $30,000 to $29,000 in a year, and then another year I was able to pay off $10,000 to $15,000, and it was all because I was able to see the progress. That was so important to me. So utilizing those strategies definitely helped. But had it not been for me owning the home, I would still be paying for that debt. 100%. I would still be paying for that debt. I think it would probably have taken me, if I hadn't have sold our house this last March, I think I'd be still paying for that debt in another 2 to 3 years.
So there's another lesson that comes out of this that I think is extremely important for our listeners. And you've touched on it without realizing you touched on it, I believe. So when it comes through to realizing you have all this debt and you came up with a strategy that didn't seem to quite work for you, something happened in the interim that I think is important. And that is there's a maturity level that was achieved when you realized that this one particular strategy we're using doesn't work for you personally. It may work in the long term for a number of other people, but it didn't work for you. So there's a self-awareness there that I want to make sure that everybody understands. That self-awareness is one of those things that only you know about, or that you can figure out on your own, hopefully, and use that to your advantage. And I think you've done that very, very well as far as understanding, okay, I need to see progress. And because I need to see progress, where am I going to see that progress first? And I think you identifying the smaller debt, being able to pay that off quicker, then you have that amount of money without changing your finances and without changing anything else. You can still now take that money, and now it's an additional amount that goes on to the next payment. And by doing that, before you know it, it's a snowball effect. You start seeing things get paid off, and then before you know it, the debt becomes dramatically different. And your interest as well begins to drop off dramatically. So now that you sold your house, you were able to pay off almost all your debt. Is that not correct?
Yeah, so that's where real estate truly saved my finances. And there's one other thing that I really want to qualify, and it's that no matter what, I mean, being in the kind of debt that I was in, trust me, was debilitating. There were days where I didn't even want to get up and get out of bed and go to work because I didn't feel like any of the money that I was working for was mine. And that was really a tough time for me. I mean, I went through two career transitions with all of that consumer debt because I was working at Chipotle, then I went to AT&T, and T, and then I got into business for myself in the real estate thing. And in the interim from AT&T to real estate, I was driving Uber to make ends meet so that I could continue to pay that debt off because I knew that my real estate business was going to take some time to take off. But regardless of, how poorly I felt one day or, from day to day, I never ever gave up. And I think that is so important because I think what a lot of people do when they find themselves in this kind of debt is they pick and choose which bills they're going to pay and which ones they're going to let lapse, and that just destroys your credit. And I think that I didn't even really necessarily have an awareness that if I didn't make those payments, that I would, that it would negatively impact my credit and then make it more difficult to achieve things in the future. That wasn't even a thought to me. It just simply was, I think it was, like you mentioned, I had reached a certain level of maturity where I realized, like, look, I spent this money. I can't blame anybody except for myself. So I just didn't feel right skipping the payment. I spent that money. All of the things that I bought are here in my house right now. So for me to sit here and say that it's not my responsibility to pay for that and to make the decision to let the account go into collections and have all these creditors and, all these people try to track me down so that they pay the money. Like it just never, it was never the right thing to do to me. And I think that the fact that regardless of if I was able to make a larger payment or if I could only make the minimum payment of $25 on a balance of $2,000. I mean, it didn't matter to me. I was going to make that minimum payment. And I think over the course of that 5.5 year period up until a couple of months ago when we did pay off everything, I always made sure that I made those payments. And if I did miss a payment, I was on the phone with the creditor immediately. Hey, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to miss the payment. I thought I made the payment. Whatever the reasoning was, look at my payment history. I never really missed payments. Will you do me a favor and take the late payment fee and not report this to the credit agency? And 9 times out of 10, they helped.
So that is an extremely important thing to understand right there. So the title of this episode, or the subject of this episode, literally is don't be afraid to ask for help. So that help doesn't necessarily have to come from people a family or a relative or somebody who's got money that can loan you money, because that's not necessarily what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is reaching out to the creditors like you did. When you know that you're struggling and you're doing your best, rather than not make any payment at all, call them and say, I can make a payment, I just can't make that amount of a payment. And by telling them that, saying, look, I've got, whatever, especially the pandemic, it really, really threw a lot of people into some credit problems, I'm sure. You start losing employment, it makes it very difficult to stay afloat. There are other folks that did pretty well, but there's going to be many more that found themselves in some sort of a financial difficulty. So I think this particular instance where you're talking about reaching out to the creditors, tell them your circumstances, it's almost guaranteed that they're going to work with you. They want their money. That's the bottom line. That's why lenders are there. And lenders are not necessarily for mortgage rates or mortgage insurance we're talking about, or mortgages. We're talking about lenders for home loans or for your credit cards, personal loans, car loans, all of those lenders. They came from somewhere. Talk to them. They can probably assist you in some kind of a way.
Yeah, and actually, there were 2 accounts that I ended up closing, the Sam's Club account and the Best Buy account, because I could not catch up on them. The interest rates on those accounts were so high, there was nothing I could do to catch up. So I think after 2 years of not being able to pay off those debts, I contacted the creditors and I said, look, I've been trying to get this stuff paid off. If you look at my payment history, I'm sure you'll understand that I'm really doing my best. I'm trying to find a way to pay you guys back. But, this interest rate and the way the account is currently, I mean, I can't. So what can I do to pay you back what I owe you and avoid continuing to just pay interest? I want to pay you guys back. And both of those accounts, they said, okay, what we can do is we'll close the account for you, and we'll put it on a zero interest repayment plan. And we'll do it over the course of 18 months or 24 months. They offered me payment plans with no interest, so that I could close the account and get that debt paid off. So again, and I could have asked that question a year earlier and probably gotten those balances paid off much sooner. But it's one of those things where you don't know what you don't know. And I actually had a conversation with mom about those two accounts, and she was the one who prompted me to call them and have that discussion. And actually, she stayed on the line with the first one so that she could kind of guide me through how I should have that conversation. So again, ask for help. I asked my mom for help. I asked the creditors for help. I even from time to time would pull a friend in to try to help me out. Hey, I don't have enough to make my minimum payment this month. Can I borrow $100 from you until next Friday? I mean, I was never too proud to ask for help.
And that's the other thing too. A lot of people seem to look at debt as being some sort of a bad thing to happen with people, and or it speaks ill of their character and all of that. And that is just simply not the case. I mean, you were 22 when you purchased your home, 22 years old, and then you turn around and got yourself into all this financial debt. So as a parent, I mean, we were extremely proud of you for being able to, number one, make the decision, and then actually be able to qualify and get the loan to purchase your first home. That was unbelievable. At 22 years of age, you could do that. But then you turn around and start looking at the debt that you acquired and some of the decisions that you made during that period of time immediately after moving in. I can guarantee you there are many listeners out there right now that they're listening to this that have done the exact same thing and may be stuck in a position now where they're not sure how to get out of it. They don't really know. So this hopefully will be very helpful to them.
Yeah. Well, the other main topic of this episode is how real estate saved my finances. So I kind of want to move into how that home purchase that I made when I was 22 was really my saving grace. And like I said, I never gave up. I never missed a mortgage payment. I always made sure that my mortgage was paid. I always made sure that all of the credit cards, whether the minimum balances were paid. Every bill that I had was always paid. And it took several years. I finally started chipping away at some of that debt, but I mean, life happens. I have a cat who was attacked by a dog. And it cost me $1,500 to get him surgery and, all these things to get him fixed up. I totaled my car. I ended up having to buy a new car. So, just life happens. Things happen. You need new tires, vehicle maintenance. I mean, when you have a house, expenses come up. I had to get a new roof that I couldn't afford to get for a year and a half. I had a roof that needed to be replaced that I didn't get fixed for almost 2 years until I moved out of the house. So, I mean, all these things happen and you can't really anticipate them. But the fact that I never gave up and continued to pay that mortgage and never lost the house in that 5.5 year period, a lot of it, I'm not going to sit here and say that I made all the right, perfect decisions, because there's a lot of factors that play into this. Luck is definitely one of them, I would say. Right place, right time. The majority of the equity that I had in that house didn't even come into play until a year ago. Not even. The market that we found ourselves in this last 6 months, I mean, yielded us an extra $50,000 in equity that we otherwise wouldn't have had. So, but at the end of the day, it was the decision to purchase that home, the decisions that came along afterwards to not give up and to continue to make those payments that gave me the opportunity to then sell my house, which yielded us enough money to pay off all of our debt, pay off both of our vehicles, and to be able to put a 20% down payment on a newer, better, nicer, better location on a new home. So, the fact that we remained intentional and we had those goals laid out in front of us, we knew what we wanted, and that we never gave up, were why our finances were able to recover from the poor decisions that we made in the 5 years prior.
Yeah, so I think the crux of the big lesson in all of this is even with bad decisions over time, especially with real estate, you can make up for that. It's not a deal killer. It's not the end of the world. It really isn't. I mean, truly, uh, with real estate, it's one of the most forgiving investments one can make. It truly is. You know, it's funny. I had this conversation, especially with other investors here recently. So right now, it just doesn't seem like it's a great time to invest in any kind of real estate just because prices have gone so high. Now, eventually the market will stabilize and it'll be back, we'll be back in the game again for investors. Uh, but I mean, at the same time, I'm looking back and I have this conversation again many times. There have been many times where I said, man, I really wish I would have bought that land way back when, or I wish I would have bought that house way back when. Not once have I ever said, that was a bad idea. And we now own multiple different real estate properties. Not once did I say any of them were a bad idea. However, many times I've looked back and kicked myself saying, I should have, or I could have, or I would have. I should have, I should have, I should have. And you don't want to say that. You want to be able to jump on it, make the decision now, and then if you can afford it, make the move, make the run, do it. And then 5, 10, 15 years from now, you'll be looking back saying, man, that was one of the wisest decisions I ever made.
Yeah. And something else I kind of want to touch on is that, I've acknowledged that I wasn't able to do this on my own. So I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are saying, well, Daniel, you know what? I'm already in debt. And unfortunately, I didn't purchase a house, 5 years ago. So what are my options? We all know that today's real estate market is a lot more competitive than it was in 2015 when I bought my house. I was able to have access to all of these things that offered me the opportunity to get into a home for very, very cheap. So what I would say to those people is you have to understand where your priorities are and know what sacrifices you're willing to make in order to better your future. 5.5 years ago, Kyle, Texas wasn't the place to be. It's not like I went and bought, a house in the most desirable place where I saw myself settling down forever. That wasn't it at all. It was simply a matter of I wanted to find a way to make my money work for me, and an opportunity presented itself. But I think too, mindset has everything to do with it. I think your goals and knowing where you want to go is extremely important. All of these things play a factor. Right place, right time, luck, you can call it whatever you want. I prefer to call it the law of attraction. I feel that if you really believe, I mean, just as a for instance, the opportunity that presented itself for me at Chappell in the Austin area many years ago was not one that just fell into my lap. I mean, I had been offered 5 other locations and been offered to move to places like Texarkana and Longview and Huntsville, places that I didn't want to be. But I knew as soon as I got into management that eventually I wanted to take over a location in the Austin area, and I was not willing to compromise that. I wanted to be in Austin, and the opportunity presented itself to me. And it didn't present itself to anybody else. It presented itself to me. And I think that was simply the law of attraction. I knew what I wanted, and I put that energy out into the world, and I did everything that I could in my power to try to bring that along. So I think, again, it comes down to knowing what sacrifices you're willing to make, knowing where you want to go and what you want to do. There are markets around the country where you can find a home for relatively cheap. There are still markets where there's not multiple offers happening where you can get an FHA loan accepted. It's just a matter of, are you willing to make those sacrifices? And if you are, then great. It's time to put your goals into motion. If you're not, then maybe it's time to dig a little deeper and self-analyze and figure out what is most important to you so that you can get on the right track. Because in life, I mean, we're here for a reason. We're here to move forward. We're not here to just be stagnant. And I truly believe that. So that's just kind of my story. So I hope that our listeners got some benefit out of that. Dad, do you have any kind of wrapping up closing thoughts?
Yeah, actually, I do. So, me at the end of every show, I always talk about referrals and how I really do drive referrals. This is no exception, especially in a subject matter like we talked about today. The referrals are a very big deal. So, if you find yourself in some sort of debt and you need some help, you reach out to us. Reach out to us. We will help you with that. If you've got this mindset that you're not quite sure where you want to go and you're still kind of struggling with how to set your priorities and that sort of thing, by all means, please reach out to us. If we can't help you, we can definitely get you somebody who can. So it's all about the referral kind of thing again. Reach out to us. Whatever the subject matter is, especially when you're talking about real estate and maybe buying or selling later on, by all means, please reach out to us. This credit card debt or this consumer debt can really be overwhelming, but don't let it get you down. You're definitely a success story to that. I too am a success story to that on a different level. So yes, absolutely. Reach out to us. We've got the resources. We can definitely help some folks get on the right path.
Definitely. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on the episode today. Again, I hope we provided you with some good value. I hope that this little moment of intense vulnerability normalizes maybe your situation. And if you're in a situation like this, please let us know. We'd love to offer you guidance. I'm more than happy to offer my personal experience and some of the strategies that I use to help pay down the debt. Let us know. We're happy to help. Thank you guys again for tuning into the Chappell Real Estate Show. We love spending this time with you guys, and we'll see you all next week. Take care. This is the Chappell Realty Group signing off.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Chappell Real Estate Show. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend and leave us a review. Find us on social media at Chappell Realty Group and online at chappellrealtygroup.com. Until next time.